We have a little over an hour to talk. You all set? So welcome, for those of you who have never been to the Elizabeth Coleman Center for the Advancement of Public Action, a special welcome to all of you. I'm Brian Campion, State Senator. I also am honored to serve as the Director of Public Policy Programs here at the Center. The Center for the Advancement of Public Action was created to be a catalyst, convener, and a creative space for social change. In many ways, a perfect spot for such an important discussion this evening. Before I begin, or before I continue, I want to let everyone know that the Select Board is not able to be here this evening because of a scheduling conflict. I am happy to take full responsibility for that. I'm afraid that when we were working on calendars, we did not coordinate, so they apologize, as do I. I want to continue by reading a quote from Bo Yang, who's the Executive Director of Vermont's Human Rights Commission. Bo was recently quoted as saying, "Discrimination happens everywhere, but in Vermont, people of color are isolated. There is no automatic community with shared experiences. In Vermont, these communities must be forged by people from all walks of life who care enough about one another to learn, support, and stand up to discrimination. And there is no doubt that this can be done. And that is what we are here to do tonight." I'm joined by Vermont Attorney General T.J. Donovan, State Senator Dick Sears, who also serves as the Chair of Senate Judiciary, Vermont's Executive Director on Racial Equity, Susanna Davis, student activist and UVM student Skylar Nash. Representative Mary Morrissey is here as well. There she is. And of course, all of you we see as active participants in this discussion. I thought I'd start tonight's program by asking each member of our panel just to say a little something about themselves, their work and their experiences, and then I'll open it up for an evening of discussion. So with that, I thought I'd start with Skylar. If you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think, if not, you might just have to project.
Am I on here? Oh, great. Here we go. So hi, I'm Skylar Nash. I'm a junior at the University of Vermont. Still a member of the basketball team there, but haven't been able to play the past 3 years because of a bunch of knee injuries that I suffered. Yeah, I know I am getting old.
Still looking.
I appreciate that. That's the type of energy that I need here. That's why I had to get out of Burlington to get a compliment like that. I came to UVM from the south side of Chicago. Grew up, where basketball is like a religion there, similar to football in Texas. And really had blinders on to just stay focused on that singular drive for basketball. Still recognized that, my friend who's visiting me here, that we were under constant surveillance and threat just for the sake of us being two young black men in the city of Chicago. And coming to UVM, people would ask me, it must be so great to be here in Vermont, getting out of Chicago. I hear these terrible things about Chicago. But as I've been here in these past couple of years, recognizing and trying to tell people that it's not just in Chicago, it's not just in New York, it's here too. And if we are going to be the state that we want to be, that we have to recognize that and move towards achieving that. And since I have been here and had to move aside from my basketball goals at UVM, I've really engaged in criminal justice reform, starting with an internship with an organization called Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, based in Burlington. We're working on sentencing reform and then also the intersections between criminal justice and racial justice, which we know there are plenty. I just want to go on the record as saying this, I do plan on staying in Vermont after I graduate. I never expected that would be my biggest applause line everywhere I go. So now I'm kind of thinking conditioned to make sure that people recognize that. I think it automatically endears me to any crowd that I'm speaking in front of. But I get some crazy looks from people at home when I say, I'm going to stay in Vermont, guys. And it's not because, and they look at me and are you sure about that?
Blink twice if you're okay.
Exactly. But recognizing that, we're not where we need to be and where we want to be. We do have our issues and our struggles and our communities, but this is a state where we have this immense possibility for growth and for people who want to take part in that responsibility and carry some of that load to really be change makers here. And so Bev Colston, the director of the Mosaic Center at UVM, we always say, we don't look down on people who aren't willing to take on that responsibility and that burden because it can be great. But some of us have to if we're going to get to where we want to be. And so that's the work that I'm trying to engage in as a student and the work that I'll continue to engage in as a community member once I graduate. Thanks.
Great. Dick, come on.
Scott failed to mention that he's an intern with the Senate Judiciary Committee as well. I guess he's embarrassed by that. But, he's actually been more than an intern because he's been somebody we've been able to call on to look at certain issues without blinders on. And he's been extremely helpful to us. We gave him an A+ last semester. I don't know what happened this semester. I read the Vermont Digger article this morning, and it hit me that the basic headline was nothing's changed in 2 years. And that may be true in some measures, but it's also, I think a lot has changed. And we recognize now that I think more than ever that we have a statewide problem. It's not a Bennington problem, folks. It's not a, pick the town, not a Burlington problem, not a Winooski problem. One of the first things the Senate Judiciary Committee did was hear from a group of people from around the state. And what was surprising was the similarity to the behaviors that we saw in Bennington in the Northeast Kingdom, where one wouldn't expect those. So some of the things that we did do was we created a position at the Human Rights Commission called an outreach worker. And that outreach worker helps to get the message out that there are things that you can do and you can get help. That was an important position. We also created the position of racial equity director. And I won't go any further into that since the executive director is here tonight. But that was an important step. We also created a real commission to look at racial disparities within the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. Because if you just think it's just in the adult system, it's not. It's in the juvenile system as well. If any day that you go to Woodside, you may see 2 persons of color there out of 5 people. So there's, we've been looking at those things. We also created the Ethnic and Cultural Studies program that's just started up. So those are some of the things that the legislature tackled and did. We weren't able to pass a bill to restrict somebody's right to speech. And it's a good thing that we weren't able to do that. But on the other hand, in some ways, that's emboldened certain folks to speak out in ways that I think most would agree is inappropriate. Now, we're looking at how does law enforcement deal with some of these situations, and I know the Attorney General will speak to that, but you have to have a case to prosecute. And it's not always as easy as it might seem. We're going to continue to work on this, but again, it's a statewide problem, not just a Bennington problem. And we do ourselves a disservice when we just focus on it's a Bennington thing. I think everybody here who's at the table who's from other parts of the state would agree that it's not just a Bennington thing. And it's something that we have to deal with. As Brian pointed out in his opening remark about isolation, that's something that we don't often see here. We don't realize how isolating it is for a person to talk, or other minorities for that matter. So I appreciate it, and I'm glad to see such a crowd. We were worried about the fears about the coronavirus. And as long as we keep the elbowing and avoid the shaking hands and other things, we'll be fine.
Okay.
I think I directed you.
How's everybody doing? TJ Donovan, happy to be here in Bennington, Senator Camping, Senator Sears. Thank you for having me. And I think what Schuyler said and Senator Sears said really raises the fundamental question that we'll address tonight. And first of all, it's the acknowledgement that obviously racism exists in the state of Vermont. It's not just a Bennington problem. It's not just a state of problem. It's a uniquely American problem, and we need to acknowledge that. Secondly, the question is, can you legislate away racism? Can you prosecute away racism? What are the tools available? How do we address this? Which is this uniquely American problem that permeates every part of our culture, in every institution, and in every system. And it's not just a criminal justice system issue either, I would argue. Certainly you see the results of the criminal justice system with the disproportionate amount of people of color who are incarcerated, not only in our jails in Vermont, but throughout this country. And you look at Vermont, and our jail population should be a reflection of our general population. That's how things are supposed to work. And in Vermont, I could be wrong on this, but I think we're less than 2% people of color. Our incarcerated population is 9% people of color. And the question is why? And it may not be explicit racism, although in some cases it may be. But those are the questions that confront us. And those are there are really no easy answers. But what we have to do, as one of my colleagues said to me, is that guys like me have to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and to listen to people's lived experience and how racism plays throughout our system, not only from the community to schools, to jobs, to housing, and yes, to the criminal justice system. You know, we've been going around with, and Brian, thank you for mentioning Bor Yang's name, with Bor and some other folks, having conversations. And I remember, I think we were in Winooski, and I think you were there, Schuyler. Gentleman said, this African-American gentleman, and he said, you know, I went over to my neighbor's house. I was outside, I was doing some gardening, and I needed to borrow a shovel. And when I knocked on my neighbor's front door, no answer. And so I went around back, because I thought they might be back there, or there might be a shovel I could borrow. I do that all the time. I'm sure all of us have done that. I do that all the time. And another neighbor called the cops on this guy. You talking about the issue of privilege? I'm walking over to my neighbor's house all the time. I'm walking down the street without fear every single day of my life. I'm driving down here without fear. And I know that's not Schuyler's experience or Susanna's experience, and I need to understand that and get a better understanding of what we can do differently and to validate those experiences and then ask the tough questions that Senator Sears said. Is this a crime? And the fundamental question as the chief law enforcement officer that I have to answer and apply to folks is simply this: to call balls and strikes. Because I believe that the Constitution applies to everybody or it applies to nobody. And we're not going to make exceptions to it, particularly during this time in our American history. So when we talk about reforming the criminal justice system, I think Senator Sears has been not just a leader in Vermont, he's been a national leader. I think Vermont has done more to reform our criminal justice system, whether it's justice reinvestment, and this bill that collects data, not just on police. But here's the thing, I hope we get into this tonight. we're gonna talk about prosecutors. The ability to charge somebody is an awesome power. And all the discretion that goes into that charge, whether it's gonna be a felony, whether it's gonna be a misdemeanor, whether you're gonna ask for bail, whether you're gonna plead out. And when you talk about the number of people going in, there's one thing about sending somebody to jail, it's this, they're gonna get out. And then what is the impact on the community when we talk about reconciliation, when we talk about public safety? We have to acknowledge the collateral consequences that criminal convictions will, for people of color and the poor throughout this state, have marginalized an entire community, impacts on housing, impacts on education, impacts on employment, that we have created an entire subset of our community in the name of public safety. And we have to acknowledge it hasn't worked because it hasn't been fair. It hasn't been evenly applied across the board because all the verities that at play. And I will hand this over, but you know, we're at a college campus. And I was at the school up in Burlington that I won't name. And it was a Friday. And I said, it's a Friday night. They said, how many of you are going to break the law tonight? It's a Friday night. I said, whether it's drinking a beer or whatever. I said, what are you worried about? Kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, campus security, campus safety. I said, why is it, if I ask the same question to a group of kids your same age, 6 blocks to the north, who were engaged in the same exact conduct you were, but we're not on a college campus, but we're on North Street, and they would say the police. And what about those life paths of people, of that charge, for that person who got that arrest on North Street, went into the criminal justice system, took the record? We change people's lives fundamentally through the criminal justice system, oftentimes for the worse. And we have to talk about diversion, we have to talk about expungement, we have to talk about reforming our system so we have alternatives across the board. We have to talk about restorative justice, not just in our criminal justice, but in our schools. We talk about the expulsion and suspension policies of schools that lead to the criminal justice system. So I look forward to this conversation. It's a tough conversation. It's a conversation that's long overdue, but I'm proud to be here with Senator Sears, with Senator Campion, Schuyler, and Susanna, and I look forward to more of the conversation. Let me take my napkin. As I just held this, yeah.
A lot of trusty.
Yeah, a lot of trust.
Buenas tardes. I'm Susanna Davis. I am your Racial Equity Director. Very, very pleased to be here. And I suppose by way of background, I've forgotten the question, but I think that's what it was.
Background is perfect.
So I have been for the last 7 or 8 months the Racial Equity Director for the state of Vermont, based in Montpelier. Before that, I was living in New York City for roughly a decade in municipal government. I was the director of the City Council's Black, Latino, Asian Caucus, and after that, I was the director of Health and Housing Strategic Initiatives at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. At heart, I am a philosopher, but by profession, I am an attorney. And I appreciate the question about experiences, because I think it's really important. Schuyler, the senator, and Mr. Donovan have all raised different issues surrounding intersectionality. You talked about not just being 2 black men walking, but 2 young black men, which absolutely plays a role. For example, how many 12-year-olds are killed by police in our country because they thought he was a 19-year-old man, right? We talk about criminal justice system, and we talk about the trust or distrust of criminal justice system, and what's important to remember also is that it's not just a particular part of the state that has garnered that level of mistrust. I mean, it certainly has, but that's representative of state violence on the whole, which happens through legislation over the last several hundred years, which happens through local, state, and federal level regulation, which happens through hard and soft case law and other practices. So there's a whole lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we'll get to it later in the conversation. But something that I can speak to personally is also the intersectionality of being not only a person of color, not only a young-ish person, but also female, right? The expectations put on women by our society are, albeit they are changing, but are certainly rooted in a lot of deep historical preconceived notions about who we are and who we should be. All of those things matter, I think. And something that I say a lot when I have these discussions about race and racial equity, which, by the way, is perhaps my least favorite thing in the world to do, is to talk about race and racism, but unfortunately it's the reality of our lives and our country. But when I have these conversations, I often find myself reminding folks that in our country, when we think about race, we tend to think about the legacy of slavery in the United States. We think about Black Americans and we think about white Americans. And it's completely understandable. It's still very fresh in our minds, and its effects are still strongly felt today. But I do often encourage my partners in this dialogue to remember that we have Latinos here in Vermont. We have Asian people in Vermont. We have Indigenous people in Vermont living in a state that supplanted their own existing society. So when we think about racial equity, I really encourage everyone to remember the variety of groups out there. There are so many more of us. As a matter of fact, Vermont has 30,000 non-white people living here, and that's just the ones who are counted, which requires me morally to remind you there is a census coming up. And I tell you, it is so imperative that you respond. It's 9 questions. You can now do it online and over the phone. And for every person in our state who is not counted, that is $4,000 per person per year for 10 years in federal funding that we will not get as a state if you are not counted. That's it. That's all I got.
Terrific. Thank you all. Great. So I have a few questions, but I think we should really start with all of you. Questions, comments? I'm really here to facilitate this evening. Yes, please. If you're comfortable.
I find that it is totally impossible for me to get a lawyer who will be a competent listener without just, looking at the clock or playing the cards that they're dealt. Because that's what we have here. There is no access to a lawyer that's not going to dump a case 2 minutes to 12 and go, oh, you need to get another lawyer, or I can't take your case because I got a phone call. So there's a problem here because I'm redefining trafficking, big time, trafficking. My son, what the state did to my son has become an international issue. Okay, I'm scared to say something because there may be a revolution in Italy, because this was the Italian bans. The first thing you need to know about a baptized Jew is we're not Jewish. And that's anti-Semitism. And you keep on hunting us down. When I applied for the Holocaust funds, let me tell you what happened after that. Oh, excuse me, there's gentle ears here. I ran across the state lines with my son for safety. We ran from San Diego. Okay, this was Nevada. Yeah, I was that 12-year-old girl, 1968 in Boston, that everybody keeps referring back to, like I did something wrong. What, I won a scholarship? I won a gold key award for the Ben Franklin families? Because we're artists, we're architects, and they equity strip us again and again and again. Violations of the Geneva Protocol, 1925, always follows with equity stripping of all the real estate, with forced incarcerations, trumped up charges, manipulations of medical codes, and nets of football, throwing babies through blood-stained glass windows. This is an endless war on infants. Infants that the orphan makers of orphan illnesses maliciously created issues which everybody denies. Everybody denies. The SV40 virus that created brain tumors in the next generation. Everybody denies the morning sickness to the same family so that you could demonize us and go, oh, God must be punishing you. Why? Because we want to have economic freedom. We want to declare a little independence. We want to be Mexiteers. You know, step back, okay? Do you know what an unaccredited investor is? An unaccredited investor is an investor in advanced science, a volunteer that gave a never again promise. And when we came to Vermont, with all the wonderful things you say, but do the opposite. You say all these wonderful things, but you come here and you get this KBG psychologist theory, like out of the draconian Dracula stages, and it's nothing less. Medicare for all turns into the Auschwitz for us. Still to this day, no loyalty, any case in my name.
If we could, let's start with that. If I could have the Attorney General just talk, if you're comfortable, just with resources, legal resources for people in general. There might be other people in the audience. I noticed the other people nodded their heads.
I think it depends on the legal claim. If it's a civil case, you have legal aid. If it's a criminal case, obviously there's a public defense system.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to talk with you afterwards with my staff to try to help you.
They just switch it to their political agenda, okay? I want to keep politics out of our health care. We like to keep politics out of our health care. I'm sorry, I sound like my emotions are disturbed.
It's okay.
My son spent 15 years in your prisons for a crime he didn't commit. He should have been the plaintiff. I'm the one that called the police. We had home invasions, okay? These people chased us across state lines, teamed up with their cousins here in Vermont, sent some girl to my house to try to lure my son out to go make a movie with her. I called the police, want to know who sent this girl, this underage girl, to my house to go make a movie with a film crew waiting.
All right, well, this is one of many questions this evening. I think that the Attorney General has responded a little bit. I do want more conversation. We can always return to
My
things.
son needs to have his record expunged. He can't get a job.
Right.
He is a pediatric brain tumor survivor.
All right, this is part of the conversation, without a doubt.
We can't get school choice.
But let's have other people, other questions, and we can always return to this. I just don't want to run out of time on one issue. Yes, sir, please.
Guys, listen. What I want to say is, what you guys are talking right now about Vermont and all the stuff you're saying sounds like bull, right? Because just like this lady's complaining and upset about things, the whole town is sinking, okay? They're sinking to the bottom, okay? Now, I haven't even said anything about the race issue yet, but what I'm telling you guys is, right, first of all, look at where we have this meeting, right here in this place. You guys need to start coming to Willowbrook, Beach Court, all these places where all these kids come from, okay? I work with them every day, okay? Somebody like you are never there, okay? I don't know what this is. Is this a racial panel? How can that be when you guys don't even come to any of the panels that we have on racism already, okay? Right now, what you guys are doing, this is nothing but photos and pictures, okay? You just want to look good, all right? But what I'm saying is, there's people, and I'm looking at them in here, that's been fighting the battle, okay? And everybody else is sleeping, all right? Specifically you guys, that can sit here and put all this stuff. This guy, Max Mitch, is still harassing me, okay? Calling me names, all right? And doing all of these things, right? And I'm just supposed to sit there and ignore it, okay? Now, what happens, right, when my son is walking home, right, and this guy, because this guy is always walking around, right, and we already know what he's capable of, okay? Sears, you already talked about domestic terrorism. You already know what he could be capable of, right? And he's walking the streets, right? I worry about my son walking back and forth. We already know that there's a 3% nation up here, which is hardline racists riding in trucks with big guns, okay? There was a few years back when y'all did this, when the banner wrote up something about Crips and Bloods being in Bennington, Vermont, over one person. Now you don't hear anything about those gang signs or those signs being put up all over town, okay? It's just kids playing. Well, how come it wasn't kids playing before? Because they was targeting people. The police target people. There's a case right now that I'm familiar with, and you guys know it. So stop sitting here saying that this stuff don't happen, okay? And how good this place is, all right? Stop playing around, all right? Because there's people out here suffering. Not only the black people, but the poor white people who can't even be here. They can't come all the way across town. They can't even come to go for a meeting with their kid at the school, right? So we got to try to bring the community together somehow, right? So if you fix the race issue, right? Maybe you fix all those other issues, or try to attempt it and stop acting like it don't exist, like you guys continuously doing.
Okay, Susanna, do you want to respond in a way? I mean, through your work and what you do
You
and
gotta respond.
anything like
These
that?
other people need to respond. These other people who say they for us and they for the state, for these people. This town is sinking to the bottom. She can't even find a lawyer. I gotta wait for my son to see the dermatologist in September.
20 years.
No, you speak. And you speak.
20 years.
Not these guys. We already know what they bringing. What y'all bringing? Nothing.
I am sorry to interrupt. One of the things that I do want to keep, and I apologize for not interrupting earlier, we really do want to have a conversation. We want to have a level of respect for one another. We want to keep voices down. This is a conversation, something that we all want to be here for, something that we're trying to learn from one another. So I do want to mention that, and just again, have a level of respect for one another. Everybody here is here for a reason.
I apologize.
And so, no, there's no reason to
Let me just
apologize.
say, the level of bull that's coming
There's
out
no
right
reason
now
to apologize.
is really bothering me.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Yeah, our emotions are disturbed.
All right, so let's just continue to get voices out here.
Our loved
Please.
ones are hurt.
Actually, I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry, do you want to
I'm
go?
sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but I do want to say that I really deeply appreciate your candor, because a lot of times when we have conversations or government action around an issue like this, it often happens in controlled environments. I think that you spoke to that, and that's real. We have to be able to meet people where they are, and I think that you said that, right? It's about getting to communities where people are who are directly impacted by this. That's important. I think this is a great step to get to accomplishing that, and there's more to be done, and there's more places to go. I think it's a yes and. I also appreciate what you said about hearing people's concerns, and being at people's level. One of the things that in the racial equity and just any kind of equity, whether it's equity around race, LGBTQIA+ community, socioeconomic disparity, people living with disabilities, sex, gender identity and expression, any kind of equity, one of the things that's really important is that it be people-driven, and that we be listening to, incorporating, and reflecting the needs and the feedback of the community. I think you spoke to that. I think you're 100% right. I wouldn't have a job in this state if people were saying that race isn't, if the state was saying that race isn't a problem, I wouldn't be here. I do think that we've taken some steps towards it, but I also am not willing to hang my hat on that and say that it's enough. It's not enough. People are hurting, people are afraid, people don't feel like they or their children are safe. People feel like they don't have access to resources, and that's real. And I respect that, and I appreciate both of you for your candor. You know, it's about identifying those drivers. It's also about identifying solutions, and not just the BS ones, but real ones that are going to reach people.
Yeah, there's no solutions.
I think there are solutions, and I think there's a lot of models
Right.
from other jurisdictions that we can borrow from that have shown to be successful.
A lot of the problem is terminology.
Some of it
Because
is,
we need
yes.
some linguistic evolution.
Yeah.
Susanna, would you mind just saying a few words about the kind of work you do and how you would plug into a community in this position?
Sure. Yeah.
Just
So
to give us a sense of resources out there, et cetera.
yeah. So the work is. This is a new job. It's a new role. So it is going to be what we make it, right? Which gives us a lot of opportunity to really make this meaningful. This is a job that was created in 2018 by an act of the legislature, and per the enabling statute, the person in this role is required to conduct a top-to-bottom review of all 3 branches of state government to identify systemic racism. Step 2, create performance targets and metrics, oversee the statewide collection of race data, serve as liaison between the governor's cabinet, the governor's workforce equity diversity council, and the Human Rights Commission, develop model policies and best practices, report annually to the relevant committees, serve on a whole bunch of committees. It's a lot of work, and one thing that I'm discovering is that because we live in a small state, we often have a lot of work and few people to do it. So that's an overview of what's statutorily defined for this role. But what does that even mean? What is that? I mean, a lot of that just sounds like jargon, right? What it means is helping people in the state take an honest look at ourselves and saying, okay, we have decades or even centuries old laws and practices and unspoken rules that are creating divisions. People say to me sometimes, well, we don't have a racism problem in Vermont because there are no brown people in Vermont. And first of all, that's not true. There's 30,000 of us, all right? But also, that in and of itself is the racism problem in Vermont. The fact that so few people feel welcome or safe in our state says a lot. How do we communicate welcoming? Do we communicate welcoming? Why is it that every time I walk down the street, I'm very noticed. I'm very noticed all the time, everywhere, right? And you know, people ask me all the time, they say, well, you know, aren't you going to be happy when we get to a place where we're diverse? And yeah, sure, but what's more important to me is that we're diverse and it's not a big deal anymore because it's just built into the fiber of who we are, right? So it's about helping Vermont take an honest look at ourselves and say, okay, we've got a lot of work to do, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to measure it. Because it's one thing to say, well, we're going to, you know, pass an ordinance or we're going to do this and it's going to be great. But if we're not really measuring the impact that our actions as a state are having, then we're kind of just guessing. So a lot of it is data. A lot of it is...
The problem is the data. Because the data, it's like right now, what everybody's talking about right now, what the world's talking about right now, is what we were doing in the 70s.
Okay, I want to give her an opportunity. I just want to be respectful. Go ahead, Susanna, if you would finish.
Thank you. And actually what you're saying is spot on. A lot of what we do is based on decades old or centuries old policy. And I think that what's required of us as a state is the honesty and the bravery to say that was them and we see who it worked out for. But look at Vermont's future. The Vermont population is projected to grow by different racial groups in substantial ways. 278% growth by the Black Vermonter population is projected by 2050. 181% by the Asian and Pacific Islander Vermonter population. 170-something for Latinos, 20% for Native American and Indigenous people. So when we think about what the future of Vermont looks like, yes, it's about taking those rules and laws from the 30s and the 70s and saying, okay, that was designed to benefit a certain few. the future of our state is not going to be that certain few. Let's make sure that we're creating something substantial that's going to last. And we see that in our industry, in the changing landscape of our demographics. There's a lot happening in Vermont, and it requires that we adapt with it for the sake of our own survival. I'm going to stop talking because I know there's a lot of...
Yeah, no, it's
Save
good.
our own survival.
Okay, we have somebody else here. Thank you.
My name's Amelia Silver. I'm a lawyer. I live in Pownell and I work in Manchester. My question is for you, much less philosophical. How much staff do you have? And
You're looking at it.
Okay, so that answers one of my big questions, which is that you're obviously a powerhouse, but you're one person. And so when the legislation was passed, did any money follow it? Because clearly you need somebody in every county, sounds like to me. And to address the issues that were raised by the two people over here, particularly this man sitting in the back, the question about being in the place where the people are. I know, because I used to work as a social worker in this community for 15 years, you can't be where the people are unless you have staff. You got to get people out there. And so I'm curious about how much of your job right now is banging on doors and saying, get me some more money and get me people. Are you able to do the work that you need to do? And what's the plan for rolling it out?
So this role was created alongside an advisory panel of 5 appointees who serve in an advisory capacity to the person in this role. So while there's no formal staff for this office, there is that support. I'm aware that there are conversations about proposals on the table to staff this office. I take no public stance on that, but I do say that if the state of Vermont is serious about this work, it will resource it accordingly and appropriately. Aside from that, to your other point, needing someone in every county, I have to put that responsibility on every person in this room. You all are my somebody in every county. It really, really does take everyone. It takes credible messengers. You all are the envoys. Because I'll tell you something, there are people in this state who will not listen to me about racial equity, but they will look at you, and they will listen to you about racial equity. For a variety of reasons, because I'm younger than they are, because I'm browner than they are, because I am a owner of ovaries, because I am new to the state, whatever the reason is. So it can't just fall to marginalized people to continue to assert their humanity. It has to fall on the people who recognize the collective harm of inequity and the collective benefit of equity.
I'm reminded, yeah, absolutely, it's very helpful. I'm just going back to what Bohr said about, people from all walks of life who care enough about one another need to come together to support and stand up to discrimination. Somebody else has there. Yes. Ms.
Hi,
Lee.
I'm Liz Filsco. I'm the regional organizer in Bennington County with Rights and Democracy. So I have 3 questions. My first one is for Senator Sears and Senator Campion. What concrete steps have you taken to protect people of color in Bennington County in the last 4 years, let's say?
Senator, do you want to start with that?
I think I listened earlier. We have taken a step. I listed them earlier. Creating the position of outreach worker with the agency, with the Human Rights Commission was an important step forward in order to have people feel more comfortable. I don't work just for Bennington County. I work for the state. I represent Bennington County. But to say, what have I done in Bennington? I can't. The position that we have now, I worked hard on the justice reform issues and several other things. But at this point, I feel like I'm being singled out here, and I'm not comfortable.
I'm sorry, the question, I'm asking just the senators of Bennington County, what concrete steps have been taken to protect people of color in Bennington County? And I do want to turn the question to the Attorney General to ask the same of him. What concrete steps have been taken to protect people of color in Vermont? Like, let's say in light of what's been happening the last 2 years, but perhaps in the last 4 years.
Well, I think we've taken a lot of steps to try to improve policing, stop racial profiling, to make changes. But change is not easy. If you think change is easy, you're in the wrong business. It won't be instantaneous because you've got people who have been, for years, allowed to act in a racist manner in many cases, and have, you've seen it, it's in the press, etc. So while I'm being tested here, and I'm fine with that, but I don't know what I'd like to know what specific things you think we should have done.
I didn't come with an agenda. I'm asking
Oh,
what
I didn't.
concrete steps have been taken to protect people of color in Bennington County.
Sure, I feel comfortable, I have the exact same, I have right here, thanks. That Senator Sears mentioned. I also want to say some of these things have been happening for decades. I look at Senate Judiciary, I look at the legislature well before I arrived. People, I feel like, really working on these issues, and I commend them for the work that they've done. So yeah, I also think this is the second forum that we've had in this space. I think the point's well taken. We should travel around, and I think that's an important thing to do. But I don't want to underestimate these kinds of conversations. I think continuing to have these conversations, building community among one another, letting people know, as the Attorney General mentioned, how not only is he as a white man feeling, but how other people are feeling. These are the kinds of situations and the kinds of discussions that we can all learn from.
So could TJ maybe then answer the question? Because basically what I'm getting at is there's a lot of talking going on, and as a member of the NAACP, the Rutland Area NAACP, there's a lot of talking going on, but what are we doing? And is there evidence that what we're doing is impactful?
Sure. When we talk about people of color, I would first start with the opposition to the Trump administration's rollback on civil rights across the board, which is whether it's immigrants, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, or whether it's people with disabilities. We have stood up to the Trump administration and said when the federal government takes a step back, Vermont will stand up and protect people's civil rights. That's number one.
But Vermont has never protected the civil rights of
Okay, we want to be respectful of the Attorney General and people up here responding. Go ahead.
Number two, when you look at that stat that I talked about earlier, the disproportionate amount in terms of people of color who are incarcerated in the state of Vermont, we have done bail reform, and I credit Senator Sears for that, which is one of the most important things. Amelia Silver knows this as her. Let me tell you, when people go to jail, oftentimes it's the poor, oftentimes increasingly in the state of Vermont, it's people of color. And people who get locked up on bail make a very rational choice, which is to get out of jail, which means you plead out to a lesser charge and you take the conviction, which carries the collateral consequences that I mentioned earlier, which impacts housing, employment, education. That's how we have continued to marginalize people of color and the poor in the state. We passed bail reform. Number two, in addition to that, we have done pretrial services, which is the most fundamental change to the criminal justice system in the state of Vermont's history. What does that mean? It means keeping people out of the criminal justice system, going back again to the disproportionate impact of people of color in this state. That for the first time in our state's history, we now have a uniform system because the Attorney General's office, which is the only office in the state that has concurrent jurisdiction throughout the state, said it's not fair just if you grow up in Burlington that you're not going to get charged, that you're going to be diverted, that your future will be protected. Dave Scher's here from my office who rolled it out. In every county, we have 3 different avenues in 14 counties. In every county, the numbers are up with the number of people being diverted from our criminal justice system. That's a good thing. We've rolled out a public health approach to our criminal justice system, which addresses the issue of poverty, which addresses the issue of marginalization, which addresses the issue of addiction and mental illness. And that isn't, of course that touches everybody. But when you talk about, hey, let me tell you something, you said it, sir. This isn't the group we're going to see in Vermont jails, is it? This isn't the group we're gonna see in a Vermont courtroom. That's our challenge. And it's exactly like Susanna said. It's can we believe in a collective effort to address equity, that a rising tide does lift all boats. And I think the biggest challenge, which is not a challenge actually, but is an opportunity, to be willing to be criticized. I appreciate the question. And to listen and reflect and say, we can do better. Maybe I didn't get it. Maybe I didn't understand. But if we're willing in positions of power to simply listen and reflect. And your point, sir, about meetings, absolutely. We've been going around the state, we tried the biggest thing. I'm a believer now, it wasn't. Where's it going to be held? When's it going to be held? Who's going to show up? Who's in the room when decisions are made? I'm not sure I thought about that before.
Well, we just need people, we need y'all there. You know
I
what
hear
I'm saying?
you.
We need, if we, all this equity, we together, all this talk, we need you guys to be there, and when we tell you something, not get all in your feelings, right? Now, I'm not saying you, but obviously there's some people feeling some way, and they're backing off. This is what I'm saying, and I could care less about their feelings, because I've been suffering a long time too. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not even worried about that. Just when I'm here, there's a lot of people that feel a certain way that's living in Bennington, sir. And I'm telling you, it's got to the point where the select board, the school board, none of it means nothing. It means nothing. Okay? All this talk means nothing if you guys are not going to do anything. That's all.
TJ, did you want to finish?
I do want to finish. I appreciate it, and we are going to do this. And listen, I will accept. Here's our challenge when we talk about the issue of race, really from a white guy's perspective, right? Are we willing to be criticized? Are we willing to listen? Are we willing to stay at the table and work together? Because too many people have said, I can't do this. I'm going to walk away. The challenge for us is to stay at the table, work together, and find solutions. It's not going to be easy, but my commitment to you is I'm at the table, I'm willing to listen to you, I'm willing to work with you, and hey, listen, change is not going to come tomorrow for all of us, but change can come if we're willing to put our differences aside and work together, and I am. I thank you for your comment.
And we'll just, there's going to be a lot more. That's all.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I hear you.
Actually, now we've got Senator Sears. Did you want to also have a chance to follow up with that?
Well, I'd just like to follow up to the question. And I heard it the wrong way, and I responded, tried to respond in a way. Obviously, we haven't ended racism in Bennington County. Obviously, there's still problems, but we're doing our best and we're working on it. I can't get rid of somebody who does things that are not appropriate. I can't get that out of our community. We have to make sure that we rise above it and that we call it out for what it is. And I will admit, when things first happened here in Bennington with Kaya Morris, I should have been stronger in saying I deplore the behavior. All of us should have been. Every member of our legislative delegation should have
To
been.
that point,
But-
Let's be respectful,
May I
please.
finish, please? So I apologize for that, but I'm standing here tonight, and I have been for at least 2 years, working everything I can to change the way things are. And I can tell you how difficult it is to write expungement laws, how difficult it is to do bail reform, how difficult it is to do the things that we've done in the state. We're looked at nationally as one of the foremost states in trying to make changes in our criminal justice system. That came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm proud to be the chair of that committee. And we're continuing that. Tomorrow, or Wednesday, we're having hearings on expungement for the marijuana crimes, which are basically dealing with that subject. So there's a lot of things. I can't point to something specifically in Bennington. I can say I don't agree that it's sinking. I agree we have problems we need to overcome. So go ahead.
no, I just wanted to interject because you kind of took my question in an interesting direction.
Come to
So
the schools.
I would like to ask the senators, would you issue a statement? And TJ, you have to forgive me because this is VPR language and I'm a linguist, so I threw in some other words. Would you issue a statement condemning, I'm going to say, condemning the Attorney General's failure, that's not my word, I'm gonna say unwillingness, inability. Listen, I had a long conversation with Julio Thompson to try to understand the law, but your constituents wanna know, they wanna understand why this person was not prosecuted. And I had a very long conversation with Julio Thompson in your office, and I'm very grateful that he spent many hours on the phone with me on a school night explaining to me, and I still don't get it, because it's not like I was granted a law degree at the end of our conversation, but constituents in Bennington County want to understand, in the town of Bennington, they want to understand what happened, why.
TJ, do you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. No, I will not give a statement, because my job is to enforce the law and to make a decision whether or not a crime was committed.
But
Let me finish.
You have to, please, unless
Let me
you...
finish. And there was not a crime. And I feel strongly, my charge is, was there a death threat? No, there was not. Unequivocally, there was no death threat. Was there a burglary? There was not any corroborating evidence to suggest there was a burglary. My job is to enforce the law, whether or not there is probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed. I know it's an unpopular decision, but it was the right decision, and I stand by it. Now the question of whether or not racism by itself, words, will constitute a crime. No, they do not. That is a harsh reality. But that is our law. When you get into the First Amendment about this, that is our law. And as I said in my opening, here's our challenge. Either we are willing to make tough decisions and say that the Constitution applies to all of us, even people we may disagree and dislike with, or it applies to none of us. And I believe in the rule of law, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's unpopular, because that is exactly what our country needs right now. So no, I will not give you a statement. It was the right decision based on the facts, based on the law, and I stand behind it 100%.
I understand what you're saying, and I wasn't asking you for a statement. I was asking the senators. People in Bennington County, they're unhappy, and I understand that you're enforcing the law, right? But they're still unhappy with the outcome. So how do we do a little PR? How do we acknowledge that people are unhappy? And how do we have that conversation openly and honestly?
I hope this is part of it.
This has to, I mean, this is one of the most honest and forthright conversations I think I've at least been a part of recently. This gentleman here has his hand up. Let's just kind of, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Chris Williams. I live in Shaftesbury. And I'd like to talk to this issue in terms of how we have to educate our fellow Vermonters.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a question of people need allies. We have to be those allies.
Right.
So that the situation with Kyle Morris, it was described in a long article on Vermont Paper today. It's really unfortunate that, I mean, this is a story that didn't make the top stories of the year and the end of the year in review. And I said, how come this thing has got legs? This thing is going to go on and on and on. And what do you know? It has. And the outcome was not really, there wasn't really a clear outcome, and the people of Bennington County are left with kind of a weird taste in their mouth about, well, the only black legislator in the state of Vermont was hounded out of office by some local racist in Bennington, and nothing happened. And I think that, you know, when I was a young man, I was in the Southern Civil Rights Movement. I worked in Mississippi with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Made me who I am today. When I tell that story in the local high schools, which I speak in pretty much every year, I emphasize to the people that, you know, we live in a state that's the second whitest in the nation, and if you want to leave Vermont, if you want to leave Arlington and go out into the wider world, and work in a BMW plant in South Carolina, you want to be in the U.S. military, you've got to educate yourself about the racial issue, because everywhere else in the nation is further along in this area than we are, and it's not because they wanted to, but they had to. And they were hit over the head with this issue by the people of color in their community who wouldn't take the same old year after year. And so we have to move this thing as white allies. We have to stand up and say, no, this guy who has perpetrated this in our community has got to be shunned. And we have to stand up, just like the Amish, and shun this man and say, no, this is not the community that we want. And this guy is out of line, and that if we stand up, and I don't remember this happening, and I have to admit, I didn't do it either, but that's what it's going to take, because white supremacy is not against the law. It would be a different country if it was, maybe, but it's not. And so he's entitled to say what he wants to say, but we have to stand up and push back.
And I want, actually, I'm going to let, thank you. Skylar, I'm wondering, Skylar, a student from the University of Vermont, I'm wondering if you might say something about allies and a little bit about your experience, and also somebody that's, a lot younger than most of us in this room. Just talk a little bit about that, what you see and what you hope to see, some of the things you're unhappy with or disappointments.
No, I really appreciate your message and your sentiments. I think it's incredibly important, and I appreciate the emotion that we've heard so far, because it's real. And even though it might make us uncomfortable to hear that, that's part of we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable to actually grow. Because I can relate to it. It reminds me of my own mom and my dad growing up in Chicago. Around 16 years old, I stopped telling my mom every time that I would get stopped by police when I went out, because I could see the terror in her eyes. And I was afraid that she wasn't going to let me leave the house, because she had that recognition of that every time she let me out of the house, I was a target. And any interaction that I had with a law enforcement officer could end up being my last interaction. And there's a level of trauma there that is instilled in Black and brown people in Vermont, in this country, that I'm not quite sure the community at large has a full appreciation for. And if you really want to have a full appreciation for that, you have to hear that emotion and be okay with being confronted by that emotion and that pain that is oftentimes generations deep. And so I know that, with the Kai Moore's case and a lot of news cases, we hear about the overt racism and white supremacists who are putting up Patriot Front images, or just they leave no doubt about it where they stand. And that's concerning, and we need to address that. But it's really, and Dr. King kind of talked about this way back, it's the white moderate, really, that we need to address here. And I think when you talked about educating, the community at large and allyship, that's where it has to start, with recognizing that whether it's in this room, whether it's in the State House, in our schools, in the community at large, there are a lot of people here in Vermont who are so convinced and so determined to stay convinced that they are not racist, that they're not willing to disrupt the status quo in pursuit of real justice. And we need to have that conversation, and that's going to involve a lot of introspection and reflection from people that is going to be very uncomfortable. But I think once we get to that point, then we can really move forward as a community.
Yes, and I apologize, I didn't realize that you were.
Yeah, so I'm a teacher in the community of Bennington. I've written some notes as people were talking. I would respectfully disagree that this is a great place to have it. This conversation should be held in Bennington. I agree with Mr. Pratt, where people can access it. I had a hard time finding this spot. It's disappointing to hear the Attorney General mention places up north, street names and situations up north. We're here in Bennington. People in this town have been harmed. The schools are really dealing with a lot of racial problems. It's a very difficult situation in our schools right now. people from this community should be on this forum. And it is not just the work of people of color or marginalized people. I appreciate both of your action steps. They're the most positive things that I've heard. Thank you so much. As 3 white men, you hold the most privilege in this country, and it is incumbent upon you as our representatives to sit in the discomfort of this conversation and all of these conversations. I might suggest that you read White Fragility. So you want to talk about race, me and white supremacy. These are 3 great resources instead of just using people of color as resources. And I want to know what actions, what movement, what anything is being focused on for the schools, because we have a problem in our schools.
Yeah, that's where my part started.
Does somebody want to talk about schools as it relates to curriculum? I don't know who might be best fluent in the recent curriculum that was passed or provide an update in any way. I don't know if that's something.
It won't be satisfactory, but I can say that we did have the Act 1 group, Ethnic and Social Equity Standards in Schools Advisory Working Group, which was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, that creates a committee to look at school curricula and school administrative policies to make sure that they are incorporating sound ethnic and social equity practices.
I'm honorable.
Okay, I sit on that committee. It is still a new group, and so we're in the sort of, beginning stages of understanding the scope of our work and the nature of that. I can't say that does exist. One of the things that I'm discovering about Vermont is that because of the advent of local control, it makes things a little bit more complicated in terms of creating statewide buy-in for curriculum and administrative changes in the schools. That's something that we need members of every community in every state to be able to voluntarily and proactively say, we can get on board with this because we don't really have that statewide mechanism for mandating it. I don't know if there are other thoughts. I did have 2 other things that I wanted to say.
Sure, no, go ahead. And I'll
Other comments, but I want to make sure that you feel this has been addressed adequately.
I mean, one of the things that's very difficult to address is when students of color are harmed by, comments, signs, what legal, resources do the schools have to deal with these things? It's really a problem.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Because very few teachers would stand up for children.
Did you want to also say something? Did you set 2 points? Did you say?
On different
Yeah.
topics, but if you have something to add on this, you should.
Just very brief. When we talk, and I think part of the benefit of having these conversations and the other, look, access is critical, I agree with you. And, but a lot of behavior that may not rise to criminal conduct. We have a Human Rights Commission, which addresses civil rights violations when it comes to public accommodations, which a school is. When it comes to housing, we have a civil rights unit that addresses employment civil rights violations. But the Human Rights Commission is a vital partner in this effort. Maureen's doing a great job. So and a lot of Vermonters don't know about it. And so part of this is raising awareness about the avenues and the tools that are available. Because we've been going around, as I said, these conversations, and boards in the room, very few Vermonters know about the Human Rights Commission. So you talk about an ally, and you talk about a resource, and you talk about the legal recourse when it comes about public accommodations, schools, restaurants, you name it. It's a Human Rights Commission.
I applied, I had a 1503 urgent action UN procedure filed,
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to make sure, because we remember we only have, we've already gone past our time, we have about 10 more minutes.
Right.
And I respect and completely want to be, respectful of your time, but I also want to just get additional conversations going. Did you want to just finish those couple points?
Yeah, I did.
Thanks.
There were 2 points. One was a question and one was a statement. First, I want to respectfully but strongly disagree with the Attorney General on one point. You said that you believe in the rule of law, and I'm with that. I want to be with that. However, in this country, the rule of law has been wholly predicated upon so much inequity that I believe that we could and should one day be able to believe in the rule of law. But first, we have to restructure the foundation upon which that law was built. So I would perhaps maybe add an asterisk to your comment. And I think that's important because it speaks to the approach to this work, right? Sometimes we say, well, this is our legal framework, and let's just see how many brown people we can make happy within our legal framework. And sometimes you've got to look at the legal framework and say, you know what, we've got to do much more, right? Sometimes you get a house and you can't just throw new furniture in there, you might have to gut the place, and that's okay. Because what you're going to end up with afterwards is more structurally sound and more aesthetically sound than what we started with. I think that's important. It requires bravery and humility to say what we've been doing might not be correct, but we're willing to get correct now. So that's one thing I wanted to say. But the other thing was, sir, you asked a question about how do we educate our fellow Vermonters, and that's really key. Because it's not just about telling other white folks, well, you really shouldn't be racist, bro, not to tell you how to live your life, right? But it's about how do we do that in a way that's respectful, that's illuminating, and that's effective. One thing that I find is very powerful is helping people understand how inequity impacts their lives. And I promise you, inequity impacts your life, whether you realize it or not. The example I like to give is that, as you know, in our country, we often do not pay people of color the same wages for the same work. And that's true here in Vermont. If in Vermont, in the year 2015, we had wage equity, our state GDP would have been $0.42 billion with a B dollars higher. Every Vermonter benefits from living in a state with a more robust economy. Our credit rating was just lowered as a state. Perhaps that might not have happened had we had that undergird, right? That's one example of many. I think about people like Ernesto Miranda, which is a name you know, but you may not know you know. Because Mr. Miranda is the reason that when you're arrested, you are read your Miranda rights. Because a person of color was mistreated by the system, brought suit, and secured a fundamental civil liberty that everybody here enjoys.
My son didn't get that liberty.
And that should
My
be,
son did not get his Miranda rights. They just turned around.
Okay, remember, we just want to hear from multiple
and that
people.
shows us how far, and that
Right.
shows us how far we still
Yeah,
have to go, right?
Yes.
So it's about understanding how to make the connection for people of how it impacts them, because it helps to inspire people to actually give a damn and then do something about it. It's also about not talking down to people and saying, here I am from my privileged perspective. I think I know so much. I'm a so-called coastal elite. And I'm going to tell you that you're horrible and racist. That's not effective, right? It's about being able to be credible and authentic with people and say, listen, this is a real issue. You may not like it, but let's be uncomfortable together. Let's learn together.
Right, and
I also want to say, I think one of the things we're hearing tonight is that this is, it probably should just be, of course, the start of multiple conversations in this community. And so we do have time for a couple more questions. 1 second. But I will, for those interested, leave a sign-up sheet with at the end of this table. And if people do want to gather and continue this conversation, I hope people will sign up and do so. TJ, did you have a comment?
Yes, I do. Great point about the rule of law. Totally agree with you. But it's got to be based on the facts. And when you don't have the facts, there's a saying in the law, bad facts makes bad law. And you've got to be careful about picking your case to make the change. And I totally agree with you, but it's always based on the facts. It's always based on the evidence.
Right.
Look, the Kayamura case, the facts weren't there, the evidence weren't there. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and this
I want to make a point about a decision I made as a prosecutor. Individual member of the KKK handing out flyers. Evidence was it only went to 2 people's homes in the south end of the city. in the state of Vermont. 2 people of color, 2 women of color. I prosecuted it, I brought a charge, I lost at the Supreme Court. Facts matter when we're talking about pushing, but I agree with you with the asterisk, making sure that we have the facts to make the right change. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Robert Ebert. I'm a resident of Bennington. Just a quick question for Mr. Donovan, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
You said the prison population of a state should reflect the demographics of that
Yeah.
state. So would you say the issue is that innocent non-white people are being incarcerated, or that guilty white people are getting away with their crimes to create this imbalance?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think, well, I would just say, you know, understanding how the system works and the role that implicit bias, right? Because as Senator Sears knows better than anybody, we talked about the detainee population, who's held on bail. That number hasn't changed. Those folks who are held on bail are gonna get incarcerated sentences, they're going to jail, okay? Now, how does bias work where you are that prosecutor who grew up in Vermont, and you now got a case where and you're not looking at people, you're looking at a piece of paper. You see a name that you don't recognize, that you can't pronounce. You see a person who's not perhaps from Vermont. And what do you start assuming? And then you look at what was the current law on bail. And you say, boy, this guy's not from here, and he's from this other area, and I know nothing about him, and I can't even pronounce his name. I'm gonna ask for bail. And bail should be we should go to a risk-based scientific system to take away the arbitrariness of our system, of prosecutors who are making these decisions on the front end. And I want to turn it over to Senator Sears, but that is the critical issue here. And all the varieties of where do you live? Does the police drive up and down the street where you live? Or they live in a neighborhood like me where I'm not going to see the police? What school do I go to? What are the policies? Who's the prosecutor? What are the alternative justice programs that are involved in that prosecutor's office? These are incredibly important issues when we talk about leveling out the playing field to address the inequities in our criminal justice system. They're actually community issues. Dick Sears has been a leader on this.
I want to respond to your question in a way that is going to upset a lot of people. We don't know. And the reason we don't know is we have lousy information. We have lousy data. So when we've been trying to keep track of police stops and other things, and the state police have done a pretty good job. They're getting there. Many local police departments haven't gotten there yet. So we don't know what we should know. Secondly, our Department of Corrections data systems are horribly old. I'm surprised they're not still using dial-up for the system. And you talk to probation officers and they're spending hours just on paperwork.
They got flat screen TVs in there.
Well, that may be. I'll just let me finish. So the Center for Justice Research has gotten a grant from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. You knew there was a Bureau of Justice Statistics. And it's going to take a year or even longer to get all the information about who is locked up in Vermont, both persons of color, non-color, and that includes Latinos, includes all groups. Who is it that we're locking up? Why? What are their backgrounds? Is this person who was locked up in Vermont truly real risk to all of us? Somebody that we want locked up? Or is it someone who's low risk but has been identified because of other characteristics, whether it's poverty or something else? So I'm hopeful that we'll get more information. The Justice Reinvestment Study gave us some information, but left us asking more questions.
So how do we get?
So actually, I'm sorry, I appreciate that. The mixed news is on this evening is that there is indeed coffee and tea and cookies in the back. We hope people will stick around and continue this conversation. And I also hope people will sign up to continue this conversation. Before we leave tonight, though, I want to thank everybody for being here. This really is tough stuff, and I think without a doubt, everybody came here with the idea to make change, to listen, and to learn. So with that, thank you very much. Yeah, you want to close it out for us?
Yes, I do. My name is Leon Johnson, and I've been in Bennington since 1977, from Birmingham and Selma, Alabama. I came here as an engineer, and I retired here as an engineer. What I want to say, there was several good things that the disjointed in terms of the communication all over the state need to be consolidated and networked as one. I agree for that because I've served as the individual person that has gone from Bennington to Brattleboro to South Berlin to Winooski to the rest of the places in the state of Vermont to help represent some individuals that had issues or trying to deal with peoples of color. And so that networking to consolidate, that is a good thing. I'm also on the school board, and I've been on the school board for 27 years. Bennington, the SVSU, and when I'm saying Bennington, I mean the Mount Anthony High School, Middle School, the Career Development Center, and SVSU. I'm chairman of the policy committee for all of the policies in this whole district. So when I hear the word about things about the school and things that go on, I want to open the door to let you know that all of the policies are posted on the website on the SVSU, all about, and if you wanted to pull up one of them, and it was something there that you thought was unfair or you disagree with, we not only have the policies, we have the implementation of Tier 2 type of document procedures to go along with that. So if there are things in there that allow discrimination to take place, you can bring those to me. We, CAT TV, record all of my meetings almost. We're live, and we'll open door policy for everybody to come. So what I want to do is make sure that we keep throwing out the school, and I want to make sure that you realize that we're doing everything we can within the documentation of policies and procedures to make sure that administrators and kids know what they can and can't do, and parents actually know those things. You can't make everybody not say something or do something, but we have procedures and policies that address those issues.
Yeah, and the problem is.
Please.
What I'm trying to tell you is that we have things in place. And if I don't have them in place, I'm willing to look at it to make them right. But I'm not going to have them discriminate against somebody else. And so I just want to make sure we get the policies and the procedure. If you point out something, we can manage that. And I'm quite sure.
Hey, Leon, I've tried to tell you this before. Wait, hold up, wait a second, Leon. I've tried to tell you this before. I've had conversations with you about some of these things, and you're sitting here telling me, right? And you already know that one of those teachers got fired out of there, okay, for the things that she was doing, okay, having kids lay down and do all this other stuff. All right, it went past you. You didn't catch it, okay. So this is not you don't need to feel bad about it, right? It's gonna happen, right? But now you're getting on us because we're saying this? She's been working there too. I've worked there, okay? And you know what the police department have done to me. So why all of a sudden, I'm not trying to fight. I know how long you've been here, bro. And I respect your work. I respect what you do. But you missed it, man.
Yeah.
And that's not their fault, okay?
That's just it.
Okay, again, I do apologize, but we do hope people will stick around and have coffee and conversation out there. I do want to thank these guests, all of whom, most of whom, showed quite a distance.